All right, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kat Kim Greenberg. I am a career engagement educator from the UCLA Career Center. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We're super excited to have you and to introduce you all to our wonderful panelists who have come here to talk about their intersections of identity and how they bring their authenticity to their career in different workspaces. So I'm really excited for this. I hope you all are too. I'm just going to cover a couple of different house rules for us to remember. So we will be having some set panel questions for the first hour, and then the last 30 minutes of this panel will be to directly address questions that you all may have. And so throughout the panel, if you have any questions that come to mind that you'd specifically like the panelists to address, please throw it into the Q&A section that you see here on your screen for the webinar. You can actually upvote for the questions that you definitely want our panelists to respond to. So go ahead and use that feature as well. And just as one last reminder, please fill out our attendance survey that you see in the chat box. All right, so I would like to go ahead and introduce our moderator, Colin Jones from AT&T, and he will be moderating our panel today. So Colin, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Kat, appreciate it. So hello, everyone, good day. Thanks for joining myself and my peers. We're really excited for an engaged and really organic conversation today. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Colin Jones. As you can see, I'm a lead college recruiting manager for AT&T. I currently recruit at a handful of our focus schools here on the West Coast. I just moved to LA just over a year ago, so I'm not a local, if you will, but I am very excited to be here and I've had a blast so far. And so that's a little bit about myself. I want to turn it over to the next person that's going to be engaged with us today. And I believe it is, we'll go to the next slide. Jay, if you want to take a little bit and talk about yourself.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. Hello, everybody, and thank you for allowing me in your spaces today. I'm Jay Canas, former UCLA, I'm a UCLA alum. I'm now currently working with the executive consulting team for the LA County Department of Mental Health through the UCLA Public Partnership for Wellbeing in partnership with the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience in Los Angeles County. And my specialization and focus is really children and youth, specifically systems-involved youth and LGBTQ+ initiatives.
All right, thanks, Jay. Hey, Stephanie, can you tell us a little about yourself today?
Yes, definitely. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Monday to everyone. So my name is Stephanie Castellanos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently am the Director of Talent at Foster America. So also, actually, let me take a step back. I'm also a UCLA alum. I graduated with a degree in 2010 with sociology and a minor in urban planning and regional studies. Over the last decade, I've worked specifically on building a pipeline, teachers of color, as a founder and executive director of my own nonprofit called the Coalition for Diverse Educators, in which we worked around the country to recruit and also retain more teachers of color in high-need communities. That led me to my current work as the National Director of Talent here at Foster America. Foster America is a national nonprofit that recruits folks from non-traditional backgrounds. So thinking about folks in marketing, human-centered design, finance, strategy, folks who have mid-career or senior professionals that have been working outside of the child welfare sector. And I recruit them in for an 18-month fellowship, sitting at the table, working alongside senior leaders at foster care agencies, specifically looking at supporting and tackling an issue relevant to the community. And so I have been doing this for about a year and a half or so. And in my work, I manage all of our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives within the organization. And because we are also a startup nonprofit, I also work to design everything from scratch, from our hiring design process to what we look for, to making sure that we're building anti-racist hiring practices and onboarding and retention practices within the organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. I love that anti-racism right there. So we'll talk about that in more detail later. Hey, Nohe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself today?
Yeah, good afternoon, man. That's a hard act to follow. That was amazing. I'm still taking that in right now. My name is Noan Cruz. My pronouns are he, him, his, and super honored. Also, it being Latino Heritage Month, I identify as an Afro-Latino, aka Boricua. So I'm super honored to be here with you guys here at Nike, specifically in Los Angeles. As you guys know, Nike wants to bring inspiration and innovation to all the athletes around the world. And if you have a body, you're an athlete. And really my job is around that. It's really just seeking the talent within the LA County market to be able to work at our stores. It's a great foot in the door to be able to see if this is where you identify with our culture. And that's really what I love to do. I'm also really big on community and to be able to pay it forward. I believe that everyone should be a history maker, meaning that you bring someone with you. So I'm very honored to be here with you guys and looking forward to this conversation.
Great deal. And last but not least, Wayne.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wayne Kimball Jr. I currently serve as an M&A strategy and integration lead for Google Cloud. Very excited to be here. Most of my career has been spent in enterprise strategy and transformation. Prior to being at Google, I did management and strategy consulting at Accenture, as well as the Act One Group. And prior to that, I was at Google previously. So my background is engineering. I have a master's in international business and really passionate about the landscape of education as well as its cross-section with minority populations, particularly Latinx and African-American communities, helping really drive access, exposure, and opportunity to really drive forward cultural change. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me and looking forward to the dialogue.
All right, thanks everyone. So as you can see, meet the panelists. And so we're gonna jump into our first question today, and I'm really excited. Already, we have a great panelist group here. I'm really excited to hear their feedback. So first question we have for today is, how do you bring your authentic self to the workplace? Have you needed to negotiate aspects of your identity or advocate for the value of your experiences? So I'll let whomever wants to take this question and give us some insight. Hey, Jay, I think you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I can start a little bit, and I didn't go through much, talk a lot about my background in the introduction, but specifically because I thought I would answer a little bit about it. And, as a former systems involved youth myself, it's such a big part of my identity that it informs my work. And so I make sure that that's actually a part of my authentic self. And what I really ensure that happens in those spaces is to really start with the self. It was my boss 3 years ago after graduation who said something to me, who I'm now consulting for, and said, looking for a job is like dating. It's really, is it going to be a good fit? Who is it that you are? Is it going to be a good fit for the other individual and the other spaces? And I really always try to remember that, because I really spend my time building these authentic relationships with my team and my coworkers. So I always try to remember that, to really start with the self and really just be open and honest with who I am. Just a little bit about me.
And I'll jump in there and just say that one of the things that I love about being able to bring my authentic self to the workplace is, really take time to think about what you're passionate about. And I know that can sometimes be a bit of a cliche, but I encourage you all to think about what has helped you get to where you are today and how do you want to pay it forward for others. So me personally, I'm a product of rural North Carolina. So I grew up in a very small town. I'm a graduate of HBCU, which is a historically Black college and university. And going into the workplace, I recognize that not a lot of people know about what HBCUs are, the importance that they have, and the relevance that they've had in the educational landscape in the tapestry of America. And so going to Google, I've always been passionate about not only helping recruit diverse candidates, but also making sure that we understand how to recruit diverse candidates from the HBCUs or the Hispanic and Latino serving institutions, or how we can then take our products and make sure that they are representative of not just the majority, but also all people across all walks of life. So that's how I can bring my authentic self and be able to say, like, hey, you know, we want to make sure that the products that Google produces can also be used by the African American community that looks like me, or, you know, people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So again, find your passion area and begin to, you know, bridge that gap with what you do professionally. I really believe that if you do that, you'll never feel like you work a day in your life.
I will also jump in and just first and foremost share a little bit more around the identities that I carry at the forefront in the workplace, which are quite different. And I think that's one of the things for us to really sit and resonate with is, what are my identities that I hold close to myself when I'm in the workplace? Which ones are more at the forefront when I'm at home? Which ones are more at the forefront when I'm hanging out with friends, right? Your identity shifts in many ways. And an example of this is, for example, you know, I am a product of Inglewood, California, right? Which is a community not too far from UCLA. Inglewood, always up to a lot of good, right? It carries a lot of sometimes stereotypes and connotations. So when I show up to a space, knowing that I am always going to rep my city at the forefront, always also understanding that there are implications and assumptions along with that, right? And so for me, being a daughter of Mexican immigrants, being a product also of a single mom, growing up as the only girl, being a middle child is another part of my identity. Also being cis, also being, you know, as femme, right? In many ways, also thinking about the ways that my identity has contributed to the work that I do has been at the root of everything. And so an example of that is when I was going out and doing some national teacher recruitment with Johns Hopkins and Urban Teachers about 6-7 years ago, I was leading the diversity strategy and realized that people were going out to recruit people of color in spaces that people of color were not in. And unless I was in firsthand at UCLA, I founded a Latina sorority on campus because I knew the dynamics of how clubs worked on campus, how communities of color, Black and Brown student organizations played a fundamental role in activism and developing what inspires us and where we end up. I knew that we were not tapping in to the spaces where we needed to be at, right? And that was really at the core of who I am. Because I use my identity to drive my strategy, I was able to leverage my cultural capital and understand that the strategies that had been conventionally used in teacher recruitment are not working for people of color. And that wouldn't have happened unless I understood the intersections of my identity, the way it showed up and the way that it didn't show up in some spaces. So I would say, yes, bringing your authentic self is important, but you won't be able to do that in many places because of white dominant culture, and it exists everywhere. And so that's a deeper conversation I think we can definitely have, but I think that I can sometimes bring myself to work. But I cannot say that you will always bring yourself to work. In fact, some identities might be more at the forefront at work because it's safe versus others that are unsafe to bring to the workplace.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so I heard a lot of great themes there. Jay, you kind of mentioned the dating part, which if any of y'all have been to the career fairs of late and kind of how they've been reimagined, and it's like speed networking, speed dating. So it's a great analogy to kind of start us off with today. And Wayne, with you, especially with the HBCU background, it's not really a thing here on the West Coast. I think probably the closest thing that people know for HBCUs is Baychella a couple of years ago. So it's not really a common thing. And then Stephanie, with you kind of talking about the code switching. So if for all of the guests on here don't know what code switching is, it's basically having to have different personalities in a sense, depending on what people you're around. So Levy, you kind of talked about that, and would love to kind of talk a little bit more about that in the next questions particularly. So as we have, and you can see here, we have our question number 2, which is, what is code switching and how have you used the strategy throughout your career? And I didn't even plan that, so I'm glad that it worked out that way, that we were talking about code switching. So love to hear y'all's input on that. And Nohan, you didn't speak last, so I'll let you jump us off on this one.
Awesome. So it was interesting getting this question, and I'm gonna be very transparent, honest. I even looked this up just to make sure. And I think for me, and I think I'm really grateful about my company, is that I think one of my pillars of belief is always like be authentic, genuine, and relational. And I believe in the relational aspect for me has always been really for those that do or don't know, man, a lot of Puerto Ricans are Spanglish, and I feel that my whole life has been code switching. That's all I know. And to actually even insert it and how has it been a strategy, I think for me it's been really different. I think to Stephanie's point, it's really understanding, one, recognizing your audience. Who are you speaking to? What are you trying to convey across to them? And I think for me, in my leadership aspect, it's helped me on a national level, where if I need to go over to the East Coast and I'm in Kissimmee, Florida, and we're doing an event out there where we're trying to recruit some of the great talent in that area, is really understanding that there's moments where, in the case that someone can see a visual picture of you, and your last name, they can automatically now identify. And as one gentleman came, he actually automatically, his question to me was strictly in Spanish. I had to switch and understand my strategy in that moment was, wow, my whole presentation was in English. But the cool thing was that I was able to key pillar points that he asked about in Spanish. So I think for me, throughout my strategy, and even in LA, knowing it's predominantly Latino, Spanish speaking, it's been really understanding like, okay, if I'm going into a certain community, do I understand the demographics? Do I understand to be kind of have the backup for the backup? And I think for me, it's been something really key where we at Nike now, we even have a lot of like our internal presentations where we actually have everything already translated on the bottom. And that's been something that as a recruiter has been great, where we now have extended this opportunity and the strategy that we've translated our internal onboarding documents in Spanish, that now we have a team in Mexico that we have a chance to work with recently that I've been on this project for. So I think for me, I've lived it. It's been something unique. And I think for me, it's allowed me to have additional doors opened, but also allow me to be able to be relational and really genuine and authentic to the audience that I have the opportunity to share with.
Nohan, it made me realize, as at UCLA in my undergrad, I'm an anthropology major. And so linguistics is a little bit, it's a subfield of anthropology. And so I learned about code switching, but I think now it's evolved into more than language and dialect, right? It's more also now about, attitude, voice intonation, even mannerisms, appearance. And something that I'm very fortunate about now is, and that I think is very important for all of you really, is to really find mentorship within the space, because it really helps when people really believe in who you are, right? And accept you and welcome you. And so it's a strategy to also use code switching for yourself, meaning nothing that's going to prevent you from being your true self and what brings you peace within these spaces, but also to have an interdependent relationship. Because when I always go back to the dating piece, it's not just about being a good fit, but you're gonna spend most of your time, if not over half of your time, with these individuals, with your supervisors, and you need to be able to learn from each other, and you need to be able to grow with each other. And so I think that if a supervisor and an organization is really wants to be strategic, using your unique self as a strategy in itself is the way to go. And I think looking for that as well is really important. And I'm very fortunate that, I don't have family. And I say that because my friends, my supervisors, my professors are my mentors. I learn from them as much as they learn from me. And I think that's very important.
And I'll just say that I definitely agree with Jay that code switching is far more than just linguistics and language, right? I actually would even like to assert that in past years, and even sometimes still today, code switching was kind of looked at as a negative thing, because it gave the connotation that you were selling out or not being yourself. But I like to believe that knowing how to effectively code switch is, a key trait to being successful in your professional career, while still being able to be authentic to yourself. And what exactly do I mean by that, you may be wondering. So for example, I may not talk in front of, well, I don't talk in front of executives the same way I would if I'm with the Black Googler network, right? Or I recognize that when I'm having certain intimate conversations with my team, I can be very candid and transparent. Whereas when I'm in the boardroom with C-suite executives, I'm being very thoughtful and calculated about how I deliver certain messages if I'm trying to influence a decision or trying to influence how they're going to allocate budget to my team. And then all the way down to, in my business, we do a lot of happy hours and team offsites and places where it could be very easy for you to get comfortable. And so again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be yourself. You should always be yourself and be authentic. But again, when I'm around my boss or other superior employees, I'm very thoughtful about what I'm drinking or how much I consume, or even the type of conversation that I am invoking. Whereas when I'm with peers or with other types of employees that might be at similar level, I can maybe, let my guard down a little bit more and have a little bit more fun. But what I'm trying to call out here is that, knowing how to maneuver certain situations in different groups in the professional setting isn't a bad thing. As a matter of fact, many people look at it as wow, okay, this person knows how to leverage emotional intelligence, knows how to leverage, it's your own personality in order to be your best self in that moment or in that space. And so that's how I've leveraged it in my career, because, I'm able to be with really senior people or people who I consider mentors, but I can also, be a little bit more direct or a little bit more candid with people who look like me, especially if I'm trying to gain their trust for me to be able to mentor them and to help them grow in their own careers.
I will just round off and build off of what everyone just mentioned and share that, especially as those that grow up in Duolingo, bilingual households, are kids of immigrants, you are all shapeshifters already. And I say that in a way that you have been navigating what it is like to be from here, neither there, in the middle, and whatever in between that looks like. And I will also add that in my current work as a director of talent, and my work is really to build a culture where, what is our work culture? One, that's the first question, right? What is it that I want, and what is it that we want as an organization to be our philosophy as an organization? And I will tell you now that I am trying very, very intentionally to decolonize our minds, to think about what is it like to show up like yourself at work and not feel like code switching is a survival tactic or tool. And that is at the root of what you hope, if you are working with an anti-racist organization, and what it means to be truly anti-racist. That means that I, a kid from the hood, a kid who is the first person to ever go to college or graduate from high school in their entire family, can come show up in a space and feel like I don't need to code switch. Right. And that is a utopian world that I hope to create at Foster America. I think that it requires so much depth and so much unlearning and so much personal work, especially from the white folks in our organization who founded the organization, that it is almost, it feels overwhelming, and you feel a little powerless in your work, particularly as I'm the only Latina on my team, first Latina ever hired on my organization. But it is so important to me to do that particular work so that other future folks who come and join us don't feel the need to have to code switch in different spaces, right? So I would say, yes, it's the reason I am where I am today is because I've been able to navigate spaces professionally and been able to code switch, but it has been exhausting. And I am a white Latina, right? As a white Latina in a space that has been welcomed and put a seat at the table in different ways because of the way that I look, and because of the fact that I could be, quote, articulate. That's what we're talking about at the end of the day. How articulate can I be, right? And the reason why I feel like I'm there is a lot because of my identity and the way that I show up to a space, but also the way that now that I have power and privilege in my role, now that I have so much power to really dictate what that looks like in my organization, I hope that we don't create a culture where people have to show up and code switch.
No, and thanks everyone for the honest feedback. I love it. And I think just one thing that I think all the panelists would really just emphasize today is really do your due diligence where you are applying the job. So make sure and ask those hard-hitting questions. Hey, is your workforce symbolic of the world in which we live in? And a lot of times people will be able to tell you or they won't, and that will give you an indication if that's a company you truly want to be at. So I definitely ask you all as attendees to really have those hard-hitting questions when you're going and speaking to recruiters and hiring managers like you have here that are with us today. So let's move on to question number 3, which is, how will you define selling out? And have you ever grappled with feelings or accusations of selling out? So Wayne, I know you mentioned this on our last topic, so I'll let you kick this one off first and kind of give your feedback on it.
So, this is an interesting question. It can easily seem like you're selling out, when you are thinking about yourself compared to maybe other people from where you come from. I don't think achieving at a higher level or progressing yourself and your career forward is selling out by any means. However, I do absolutely believe in being the voice and the advocate of other people that look like me and who may come from the similar place. So I recognize that if I'm doing my part, then I will never be viewed as selling out, because even though other people from my community or from where I grew up or from my background may not be at the same place, that they wouldn't see me as selling out, because I'm making sure that I lay the foundation for others to come along that journey with me, as well as to help bring them up. My personal saying is that, I'm definitely not at the top of the building, but regardless of where I am in the building, that I will always send the elevator back down, because there are people waiting in the lobby. And I think that's just the way I try to think about it each and every day, is that there are people that look like me that are waiting in the lobby, and that if I don't do my part to send that elevator back down, then yeah, I would be selling out. But no, every single day I'm figuring out ways in the workplace how I can mentor people who look like me. I'm thinking about ways I can volunteer in the community, how I can leverage my seat at the table on the various educational boards that I serve on to make sure that our Black and brown and people of color, those students, aren't being forgotten about in certain decisions. In the workplace, I'm making sure that as I do my job to go buy companies to integrate them into Google, that when we're making decisions about talent, that other people in the room aren't overshadowing the importance of diversity, or making sure that we have the world's best talent across all spectrums. So again, I just say to you all, no matter where you are in your life, no matter where you come from, just always know that you won't be selling out as long as you send that elevator back to pick up someone else.
I love what you said, Wayne, and you said leverage the seat at the table that you're in. And I think I'm going to piggy off of that, because I think, you take a look at me, and I think about this all the time, and I haven't really been accused of selling out, but it was like, why? As former systems involved. And when you say systems involved, what does that mean, right? Well, it means the homeless system. It means foster care system. It means behavioral health. And here I am now working at DMH, which I've had a complete hate relationship with when I was younger. With DCFS, I'm now working with DCFS, which again, I had a love-hate relationship with it. And now also at the executive level, working with executive teams. But it is because of that we're now moving forward with what is it that we call experts or specialists in these fields. Well, guess what? It's people with lived experience that are also experts. And so remember that as well, because sometimes, I used to hold this thing about me of like, if I have, a degree from this specific school, if I have these specific things, it will move me towards this. And sure, it has helped having an education and higher education. But what really has helped me the most has been first do I love enough myself to be honest with the people I come across with? Because I cannot expect something that I cannot practice myself with others, right? And so now when I think about that and just coming into work, and also now I'm actually working with my former social worker. I'm working with my social worker. And because of that, seeing how the possibility is now opening up, and one of the projects I'm working on now is the Community Ambassador Network. What DMH hopes to put out is going to be a network of lived experience folks to be working out in the communities. And it was exactly because of what Wayne said. How is it that we leverage our unique position, our unique lived experience in the spaces that we're in, and contribute back to individuals like us, and how it was done for me.
All right, thanks. Thank you both for the feedback there. And I think some of the poignant things that y'all really talked about is just, and it's kind of been a constant theme today is, hey, we need to develop strategies on, hey, we need people of that particular color, of that particular creed, or whatever it is, in the communities in which we're recruiting from, and making sure that there is representation. So I appreciate y'all being advocates out there in the community. And so let's move on to question 4, which is, what advice would you give to students who are evaluating employers for an inclusive and diverse workplace culture? And so Nohan, I'll let you take this one first.
Awesome, appreciate that. I think for me, one of the biggest things when we're thinking about, our students wanting to evaluate this, I think one is, this is something that I usually tell a lot of students and potential candidates: don't ask for the job, ask for the journey. And what I mean by that is, really, as you identify with someone, as Wayne said earlier, that you can really connect with, it's understanding, like, what was the journey like? What kind of, what did you have to trailblaze as a person of color, or in any concepts of your story that got you to where you're at? And I think for me, one of the biggest things that I love to do is, like, how can I get an informational to really speak to people that may not be on the executive level, but maybe they're starting out, maybe they're 3 years in. Like, what are some of the things that they've gone through that they're, like, quote, in the trenches of learning already, that would allow me to really evaluate the company that I'm really trying to work for? And I can speak for myself. One of the things that, my story was, I remember I got cut from the baseball team. I was super upset. This is way long time ago in high school, but I was very upset because my dream, right, being Puerto Rican, and it was instilled in my heart, is either sports or music. And I really thought, for me, it was like, man, I can't, like, how am I going to get there, But it was in that moment that I identified. And I remember seeing a commercial of Deion Sanders for Nike, and I was just like, yo, that's who I want to work for. And that was way back in the day. And I remember that as I was going through community college at El Camino, and I was going through Azusa Pacific University, I found a job in retail with Nike. And I think for me, one of the biggest questions that was asked of me was, how do you define customer service? And I told them, well, I didn't know the answer. The only answer I knew was, come to my home and see how my abuelita treats you, that you feel like you're at home, so that when you walk away, you actually left home. That's what I feel customer service is. I got the job. So then I asked a question when I got my boss, and I said, how do you feel this company works for you? And this was a person, African American. I said, how is it for you? And they said, it's like family, but you got to get to know your relatives. And I think for me, it was really asking the journey. And his name is Bill Spigner, one of my mentors, that seeing his journey as a man going through this company to where he's at today, it really showed me, like, yo, you got to ask those questions for some people that are in the beginning stages. For me personally, is really asking about the journey. And I think the other thing is understanding, do you see them in the news? Do you see them in articles? Are they seeking diversity? Are they seeking the talent? Are they understanding cultural moments that are happening now to be able to grow that? And I think that if you see that, ask the employer about those articles, ask them how they feel on their journey. And I think that might help you to really make that decisive decision, which for me, I've been currently in my role 3 years in corporate. I came from the retail side, and I came into this role because I felt that I can be able to really bust doors open for additional people of color to be able to come in, and of all genders and all backgrounds, to work for this company, because that's what we really want to do. So that would be for me.
So I have 6 questions that you should all be asking your future employer. And I would say the first thing is that know that you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. Again, to the theme of you're dating, this is a relationship you're about to get into. Again, you also have needs that need to be met. And here are some of the questions that I think can give you either a red flag or a sign of how inclusive a workspace is. The first is, what do employees do for lunch? This will tell you if people are working through their lunch. Now, of course, because of COVID-19, people aren't physically in the same workspace. However, people still take lunches. Is time carved out for lunch? Do people have collaborative lunches? You want to know more about this because this will be a red flag for you in terms of work-life balance, if that's a priority for you. If people are having meetings during lunchtime together, right? Or if they don't have enough time to eat their own lunch. The second question is, what does your annual review and or what are the areas in which employees are assessed or evaluated on, right? You want to know before you come into what are the competencies, which are also known as what are the specific characteristics that you are being evaluated on, and how do you get that evaluation? In some organizations, you'd be surprised, they don't have annual reviews, they don't get promotions every year, you don't get performance evaluations, there's no room for feedback within every year, right, to give 360 evaluation. Those are all indicators of whether or not there is space for you to actually grow in the space, right? And not only for you to advocate for your growth, but that there are systems in place institutionally to promote your growth, which is different. The next is that how long was the person in that role that you're currently being recruited for or interviewing for in that role previously? If a person was just there for 5-6 months, you want to know why. That's going to promote you to be more inquisitive and curious, right? If a lot of people have been turning around in that role, that's also something for you to know of whether that's an inclusive, because that's going to tell you whether or not there is some retention issues within the organization. The other question is, what types of professional development is there at the organization? Do they have a budget for professional development? That's an indicator. If not, what types of support systems do they have for you, right? Me as a manager, I sit with my my associate and I develop a professional development plan. That is part of our organization. Is that a part of the organization you're interviewing for? The next is, what's your favorite thing about working here? That is, you want to get on a personal level with somebody on what brings them to the work and what is their why, right? Lastly, I would add that what was their COVID-19 response as a team? You want to know how they dealt with COVID-19 and what kinds of spaces and opportunities did they provide their own staff to reconcile with the trauma, to reconcile with the grief, to reconcile with everything that's happening around the world. An organization will have a response ready for you if they were intentional about the way that they supported staff during this time, right? And so I think that those 6 questions can give you a little bit more of an insight into what type of work culture you're about to potentially get yourself in.
And if I think that was a outstanding response, Stephanie. And so I just want to follow that by also saying, ask the question of, what is your organization doing to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? And in 2020, them telling you that an employee resource group has been created or is being managed for, whatever you identify with, to me is not good enough, right? Because almost every company has employee resource groups now, but the real question is, okay, what are you allowing your ERGs to do? What type of voice do they have? Are they well funded? Do they have budget? Do they have a seat at the table to be able to make a difference? So for example, at Google, and Google is known to be one of the world's best employers by way of perks and benefits. But guess what? Just this year, the Black Googler Network, teamed up with some other ERGs, and we began to really dig deep on, this whole student loan epidemic is huge in America. And we found that there were certain communities that were disproportionately impacted by student loan debt. And guess what? We leveraged our seat at the table to be able to say, hey, look, we got to have a benefit about, we give employees money to go get education, but what about the people who have education and by way of that education have exorbitant debt? And just 2 weeks ago, we announced that that anyone in the company who has student loan debt, you can get forgiveness from Google up to a certain amount of $1,000 per year. So it's little things like that that you want to be able to ask about, what are you doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where are you putting your money where your mouth is, and what type of voice and advocacy are enabled and empowered in that workplace?
And I just wanted to hop in too, and I think, Stephanie, that was really awesome that you actually gave, concrete questions, and one of a couple that I personally have, because back to the dating piece, because it always stays with me, right? Because remember, you are going to be spending your time with this crew in this space. Are you able to communicate? Are you able to accept criticism, critique? Are you able to accept judgment and also kind of work through things? But I always ask, what are you proud of as a leader? And what are you proud of as a team? I always want to know, what are they really proud of that they have achieved, not just as an individual and as a leader. And there was another one that I had. I actually just asked this for my grad program, and it was like, I asked about a student, like, tell me about a student that, what's your favorite student like? But for the professional pieces, like, tell me about an employee that excels in your organization. That kind of gives me also an idea of what characteristics in their mind, how do they define what success means, right? Because I can have a different idea of what success is, and they can have one too. So it's always good to clarify. And again, it always goes back to dating to me.
Yeah, and I value everyone's feedback. I mean, there was some homework that we got there from Stephanie. We have some great personal anecdotes of how you really made an impact in your respective communities. And so I'm so proud of everyone here, just kind of making sure that we're not being a sellout, we're sending the elevator down. So very proud of y'all in that sense. And then one thing I think Stephanie really just mentioned, and it's kind of been a consistent theme, is like you're dating. The candidates that ask me the most questions, that ask me 10 questions versus 2 questions, that really stands out to me, because it says to me, okay, they really are invested in the company and really want to work for the company. So to Jay's point, hey, you're dating, so ask those hard-hitting questions and make sure you're getting to know the person, because you don't want to get into a situation that you thought you were going to know about, but it wasn't what you expected it to be. So thank you, panelists, for all the great discussion topics. So let's move on to question number 5, which is, how do you find a sense of belonging and community in the workplace? And are there any resources students can utilize now to prepare? And so Stephanie, I'll let you kick it off, just because you gave out the questions last time. So I feel like you may have some great tips for us. So I'll let you kick it off right now.
I would say in terms of resources, I will personally be a personal resource. I didn't share this in the beginning, but I'm the queen of side hustles, as I'm sure a lot of other folks on here are. And especially now in the wake of COVID and the way that we notice that relying heavily on our companies or organizations financially is always never, you always need a plan B or need to start thinking about how to sustain ourselves. So I think for me, as a side hustle queen, I would say that I do workshop trainings. So these workshop trainings provide our self-affirming spaces for the global majority. I provide tips, tools, resume workshops, all kinds of different workshops. I actually done it with, in part, Adrian, who is currently on here and works at the Career Center. I've done them alongside her as well. So I would say those are one thing that I do have a bunch of resources to share with you all, including resume templates, as I'm sure the Career Center also has for you as well. But these workshops are really created and centered through a global majority perspective. So how to do your resume as a first generation student versus just a resume, right? The other aspect, I will type it in here as resources. I have a group that has over 3,000 participants on Facebook, and it's jobs for people of color only. There are over 100 jobs a month that are posted. I personally, the thing around this group is that it is people like you and I who have access and have a seat at the table that are posting the jobs. And what we commit to as being members of the group is that we will provide you that direct access or connecting you or flagging your application to the very top. As we know that one of the things that people of color here are building is social capital. And part of our building our social capital is the networking piece and knowing that who you know actually does matter. Right? It does, right? And so, however, I can connect you to certain people or certain organizations, anybody who gets in, I'm putting the the link here. In addition to that, I can share some other resources. I have a Purpose Hustle page that shares resources, tips, tools. I have a highlights on Instagram story on resume tips, cover letter tips, applying to grad school tips. All of those are free on Instagram and in Facebook.
I think for us, the way that I've been trying to find a sense of belonging and community in the workplace, specifically at Nike, it's been really cool. As we understand, we're a really big company, and unfortunately, sometimes there's not enough time in the day to be able to try to get 70,000 plus people on a call. So how do we divide that up? And I think at our organization, the beauty of it, what I love about it is that for me, it's been really understand, like, how do we think outside the box? At our company, we believe in empowering our diverse teams and giving them the right tools. And for me, I've always seen music and food as a universal language. So one of the things that we host monthly is called Kicks and Coffee. So this is an internal thing that we do, where we kicked it off during our campaign, where we talked about Be True, Juneteenth, and then we've continued the story of, like, how do we lead, inspire, and educate our employees to be able to find a sense of community. And we've talked about how does the music culture look like through the lens, of our Black brothers and sisters. How does it look right now with my voice in these next upcoming elections as first-time voters from a Latinx generation. So I think for us, something that my company has allowed people like myself and others as well is to be able to create great moments. Something that we have at Nike is Nike United Networks, where we have the Be True, the Black Employee Network, Latino Friends and Network, Ascend, and so on, military veterans. But the beauty of it is that we're all cohesively woven for our passion for the brand, and that we could be able to come together. So I think it's really like finding little moments like that, right? Just kicks and coffee. We're talking about, what's your favorite kicks? But then we speak to those moments that we have real conversations. And I think that in these past few months during this pandemic, it's allowed us to really kind of let our guard down. And to Wayne's point earlier, like, I don't have to be concerned to code switch now, because I'm allowing to be my true self and ask real questions that I've struggled with, to know that I'm not the first or the last. So for us, it's been kicks and coffee. And I also do an external version as well. But it's more about the company and the community at hand, which has been great. But internally, it's been something great. I have to give a shout out to my coworker, Najia Kusi. She's the one who really created it and has really pushed it. So, in order to be great, surround yourself with greatness. And I'm really, really key on that. And one of those people is my peer. And I think, to Stephanie's point, lean into those free resources. I know for me, I'm a resource as well. So, I'm always willing, but again, I put the ball in your court. You got to seek it out and really ask for those moments and those conversations.
Yeah, and I'll chime in on the sense of belonging and the community. When I was at Accenture, something that I thought was really cool. So I'm a member of a Black Greek letter organization, and we actually had so many members of my fraternity within Accenture that we had our own internal group of, like, just the members of our fraternity. And we would meet on a bi-weekly basis. So we met every other week, and we come together and we talk about how we could leverage our unified voice to drive forward the diversity agenda. Then we would also talk about, like, okay, when people needed to get staffed, or when they were trying to move around in the company, that we would always start there first. Or we talk about how to get promoted as a Black man within the confines of Accenture. And so, like, those type things really made it cool and created a sense of community. But another thing that stood out to me when I was there as well is that, in the wake of all that was going on in the world, I was able to freely and candidly voice my thoughts on George Floyd, or the senseless deaths that were happening in the community, or how I felt about police brutality, or how I felt about, affirmative action, or having conversations with other colleagues about like why they had a disdain for, Colin Kaepernick or things of that sort. And I would speak up very candidly, always in a professional, respectful, and tactful way. But the fact that I felt comfortable enough to have these conversations in the workplace was huge for me. And then, after a certain amount of times where, being able to talk about these things, my senior VPs, they began to create a monthly call that was just about social justice, and they asked me to lead that conversation each month, and they would all come and support, in addition to other little things like when we were planning things for not just Black History Month, but for all sorts of diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. I was then seen as a subject matter expert on it, and they wanted me to not speak on behalf of all African Americans, but they wanted me to leverage my level and my seniority and my voice to continue to empower other people that looked like me, that may not be at the same level, but also to help educate people that were at my level that didn't look like me. And so just to be able to do that in a very candid, genuine, and authentic way was really, really powerful for me, and excited me that they valued my voice and what I brought to the table that much. And so again, just to kind of connect it back to that previous response around code switching, I think that's also why, knowing how to maneuver in the corporate workplace is really important, because if you are respected, and if you are truly your authentic self while still being a strong producer of good work, being on time, being punctual, and also showing that you represent something much bigger than yourself, then that's when doors will begin to open up, and you'll really see a whole new sense of belonging, community, and inclusivity. But if you can't have these type of conversations with a recruiter, then it may begin to show some red flags of, okay, is this place really inclusive? Will I have a sense of belonging? Will there be a community that I can fit into?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say real quick something that stood out for me about what Nohan said too, is about the self. And I can honestly say that I really started getting to know myself. And if you really start getting to know your strengths, because you have them, you're good at them, there's something you're really great at. If you really start looking to see what your personality is like, start really getting to know who you are, what you have to contribute, and really actually welcome your strengths and know what you are, how valuable you are. I think it really starts with that piece. It starts with the self. And that's my 2 cents about that.
All right, thanks, y'all. So let's jump into question number 6, and we have about 4 minutes. So yes, question number 6. So students often talk about the hidden curriculum of academia. The professionals from underrepresented communities also say there's a hidden curriculum of the professional world. What are your thoughts on this statement? And I'll let whoever wants to go first jump in.
I will say there's definitely a hidden curriculum in the professional world. Look at me, I have tattoos, I had piercings, I've had to kind of adjust who I am throughout these different spaces. And if the way I thought about it that worked for me is use it in a way that's a strategy for you first, and then whatever your space is to contribute. But just something to be aware of. Be aware of yourself first, be aware of your limitations, and then see how you can navigate throughout these hidden rules that you will learn, because you will learn it according to your individual journey.
So I won't go on a long-winded answer, but I will just say the one quote that I live, or the motto that I have in corporate America, and that is, never compromise who you are personally to become who you wish to be professionally. It is great to have, really high professional goals, and you can achieve them, and you will achieve them. But don't feel like you have to be constrained to one company or one environment if you don't feel like you fit in there, or if you feel like you have to compromise who you are. That could be your ethnic background. That could be how you identify. That could be your ethics, your morals. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the corporate world, and it can suck you in and be all consuming. But again, like Jay said, know yourself. And as I always say, never compromise who you are personally to become who you wish to be professionally.
I will use an example from my favorite TV show, Insecure. Any Insecure fans here? Maybe, yes. Okay. If we no, Jay doesn't know. Okay. So a quick background. So Insecure, two Black women from Inglewood, who are navigating their professional spaces, one in the education, nonprofit, purpose-seeking social justice space, one in law. Molly, who works in a law firm, you can tell very quickly that she's been able to code switch in that space in order to survive. And then she is joined by another Black woman, right? When this other Black woman joins, her name is Rashida, she comes into the space and she has what we would call, you know, with the hoop earrings, she has braided hair, she has, even in the way she speaks, you know, it is not code switch appropriately for a law firm space, right? I bring this example to the space because just to prove the hidden curriculum of professional world, right? Molly was definitely seen in that world and in that corporate space as someone who was abiding by the curriculum of the professional world, right? Rashida was not. Ultimately, Molly was put in a position to have the conversation with Rashida as the only Black woman in the space to say, hey girl, the way that you're speaking, the way that you're approaching, the way that you're maneuvering ain't working here. If you want to keep working here, you kind of have to brush it up, clean it up, right? That clean it up is the curriculum of the professional world. Rashida said, I have gotten to this space without having to abide by what white dominant culture sees as the way that I should behave. So I'm going to continue to do what I do. At the end of that season, Rashida was fired. Okay. To prove a point here that yes, there is a hidden curriculum of the professional world. And while you might try to bring your authentic self to the space, there are limitations to how much you can bring to the space. And it depends on what field you decide to go into. And so that is something that you'll learn along the way in your journey. But the point is that Rashida ultimately was fired. And that is a real world example also of what happens in white dominant culture spaces, which is all spaces. Every space is white dominant culture centered.
So I'll share a little bit of my history. So after I graduated and I finished, and I was still at Nike, I remember I left. I ended up taking a corporate job, working for a drum manufacturer company, and there was a 100% hidden curriculum, you know, there where it was clearly I was the minority, and I was given all the Mexico accounts. I was given all the Spanish speaking mom and pop shops. Everything was all Spanish, Spanish, Spanish. Can I read it and write it? 100%. But it was that. And I remember going to an actual NAM show, and we were showcasing our equipment. And I remember I went. Now, mind you, I'm coming from, in my past life, I was at Nike, my first leg run, and I was told to be my authentic self. I was told to find who I am and to be able to invest in myself and then find others. So I felt like, okay, well, I'm going to be presenting. I'm presenting on behalf of this new company. I remember wearing a blazer. I had a button-down white, and I had a dark pair of jeans, and I had some Nike SB Dunks. They were the ones that I love to wear, and I was like, these look fresh. I'm ready for this presentation. After the presentation that I finished, that I know I did an amazing job on, we created, I think it was 5-7 new accounts from this presentation. I remember that one of the managers pulled me aside and said, hey, great presentation. Next time, can you wear khakis, and can we wear some dress shoes? And I was like, whoa, what's going on, right? I ended up coming back to Nike. Nike looked for me. I ended up leaving that company, and I took the offer. This is my second leg with Nike. It's been 10 years in a row now that I've been with Nike, and we don't have it yet perfectly down, but I believe that we're really trailblazing and understanding that, like, we want to get rid of the hidden curriculum. We want to make sure we're reevaluating every year, to Stephanie's point, right? We're always reevaluating. What can we do? How do we empower? How do we find really great talent? Even like not even going to four-year universities. Last year, we went to 10 community colleges to find 10 designers, and it was great. And guess what? The majority came out of LA Trade Tech in downtown LA. So for me, it was great to be able to see that the only way you do this is that we got to be willing to take that. And I'm grateful for this company. I'm going to say this amazing quote by the late, great Kobe Bryant. And this is my advice for you guys in understanding this hidden curriculum of the professional world. Love the hate. And if you play the game right, you'll be loved and hated. Haters are good problems to have. Nobody hates the good ones. They hate the great ones. But I want to highlight, if you play the game right, do your job, be great in what you do, and you're going to be hated on both sides. But as he says, they hate the great ones. And I hope that each and every one of you students, as you seek out the job and the career, that you're going to have those moments, and you may be fired, right? Just like you may be fired, but you stand for what you believe in. And going back to Jay, because you know your self-worth. And if you know your self-worth, then your story needs to be told. So I hope you guys can share it.
Awesome. Thanks, Nohan. I think that's a great analogy as far as a person to kind of look up to, as far as, hey, he's a hustler just like Stephanie, and he was able to navigate those different territories like Wayne was saying. I mean, he was in the film industry, he was in clothing, he was obviously an NBA star, but he was able to traverse all these different opportunities, and it's because he was able to kind of work hard. And so thank you for leaving that analogy for us. And so I know we have some questions populating in the chat. However, I think we may be able to fit in one more question. So if we have a seventh question, we'd love to. All right, nope, we don't have a seventh question. So let's jump into the chats. And so I will just go ahead and, I don't know if y'all can see these, but I'll just spout them out. But the first question we have right now is, this is kind of a weird question, maybe, but how can we not only make the discussions / panels more accessible to people like this one, but also effectively advertise these types of events to people who might be interested at first? That may be a question for the Career Center, so I don't know if Pat, you want to jump in there and answer that at some point. So let's jump to another question that we have here, and it's for everyone. Should people be required to code switch when entering professional or academic spheres? I've had conversations with people who believe code switching is a professional requirement, which makes it sort of a positive thing. I'm interested to know, do the panelists have an opinion about these extremes? Should people never code switch, or should it be a regular daily thing? So we've all kind of talked about this a little bit, but Jay, you want to kick us off?
Colin, I actually wanted to answer a little bit about the previous question. I know this is only for the Career Center, but where it said, I know this is kind of a weird question, but, I think this is another advice I think I would say to you is, how do you want to be remembered in the spaces that you go in? What is the legacy you want to leave wherever you go? Because when you make those connections, people will remember that. And that's kind of how I have personally been invited to these different spaces, is people remember, or they connect and they say, you know what, this person might be great at this. And so all that to say is, I have this great quote, and it says, life is as kind as the people you fill it with. Life is as kind as the people you fill it with. And so with that, think of what is the legacy, and what do you want to be remembered for, or as, or, for what in the spaces that you've been. And in terms of advertising, make sure you also reach out to different blogs, different pages. There are a lot of, I have my own personal, starting my own personal consulting firm. And I, because of my focus is only on systems involved youth, I make sure to post different types of events on from a community, LA County level, when it comes to systems involved youth voices. And I make sure that I post that, and that's, the virtual nests, thevirtualnest.com, and that's usually where I post some of these things throughout LA County, just FYI.
Thanks, Jay. And I don't know if any of the other panelists wanted to touch on that topic, if so.
Yeah, I'll touch on it just a bit. I love that you can take yourself, your whole self, to a work environment. I don't want to at all say that code switching is a professional requirement, but I tell many of my mentees that you have to recognize that there is a game being played, right? So it kind of goes back to this last question of like the hidden curriculum. There is a game being played. And I say there are certain people that have no idea that a game is being played. I hope that after coming to this session today, that you at least know that there's a game being played. The second bucket are people who know that there's a game being played but have no desire to play within the game. Then the third bucket are folks who want to play the game but aren't good at it. And then you have the fourth bucket of folks who play the game to win. Now, across those four buckets, there's no right or wrong answer. But there may come times where, if you aren't effectively code switching, that you may be looked at as, oh, that person isn't professional enough, or, oh, that person is super focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and that's great, but it's causing them to not perform in their core role. Or, hey, so I think you have to figure out, as another person said earlier, what are your limits? Because some could say code switching could also be defined as, a woman wearing her natural hair versus straightening it, or, how I manicure my beard. Some people say, oh, Wayne, you should cut it off. It would be a little bit more professional. But I'm like, nah, I like my beard, right? So again, I'm just putting it out there that all of these things play into what I call the corporate game or the professional game. You have to decide how you want to play. And again, you play it in the way that best suits you for where you want to go without ever compromising who you are personally.
And Nohan or Stephanie, you want to chime in?
I think for me, I agree 100% with Wayne, and I think for me personally, there are those moments you have to see that. I know, and this is just me again, personally speaking. If I see that an area or something is not going to be able to benefit myself, or even those that are going to come behind me, then I have to really think about, is it worth the energy to go through? And I think for me, there's been moments where I've had to have done that in other organizations. And I think for me, it's been really hard because it's like, you don't want to code switch. You don't want to change up the way that you look. You don't want to have to hold back sometimes the back and forth language because you want to be able to adhere to everyone else. It's been tough. And I think it's really understand. And I like what you said, Wayne, like, it's true. Like you gotta, if you're gonna be in that game, you gotta know the game. Because if not, you will get schooled. And I learned the hard way. I did learn the hard way, but it was good learnings because I think for me, it was like I was failing forward to be able to set me up to where I'm at now. But now it's understanding that I'm a firm believer that I shouldn't have to switch, that I can show up to an event at, hopefully going forward in person, that I can dress however I want, that I could wear the t-shirt with a blazer instead of a button down, or if I just want to, whatever that looks like. I think for me is that as long as I can convey what's here and here, I think that is the most important thing that needs to be put across. And if people can walk away inspired, if people can walk away educated by those words of advice, especially this amazing panel, then I know we did our job. The day that I fail in that, then I need to really reassess my approach and how I go about code switching.
I will add that I think early in your career, code switching is non-negotiable. I think that as you move up, quote, the ladder, and as your position of power changes within the table, that you have more freedom and access and privilege to be able to navigate your own personal authentic self in that space. I think that there are systems of oppression in place, especially early on in your career, as you don't hold a lot of power and say in a lot of roles, that will keep you from being your authentic self in this space. So I'll say that personally, I think code switching is a non-negotiable. I think that everyone is a shapeshifter, especially if you grew up in a community of color, especially if you grew up navigating being the first to go to college, being the first to be in professional spaces in the same way. So yeah, I would say that it's non-negotiable. At the same time, I think that there are ways to use your cultural capital in the space. So one of the things that I would advise you to think about is, so we think about cultural capital, and just to give you a little framework, white supremacy values certain aspects in the workspace. And because white supremacy values institutional capital, which are why you're at UCLA, getting a degree from a prestigious university. So that's the academic capital as well, degrees, certifications. I went here, I did this program here, I'm an MLT fellow, I did this, right? Those are things that white supremacy values. Other things that white supremacy values are the nuances, like, for example, the cultural capital piece around, financial capital, social capital, or other things that white supremacy values, right? What we don't talk a lot about is our cultural capital and how that shows up in the space. Now, what do I mean by that? I've been at the dinner table, at a fancy dinner table where they have like all of the spoons and forks and knives, and I have absolutely no idea how to use any of it, right? If I were to know in that particular space how to use that, my cultural capital will allow me to build the connections and code switch in a way that I'm able to push through certain doors and tables, right? In the same way that playing golf, in the Latino community, we don't play golf, but because I know that moves are made on the golf field, guess who is a part of the Latina Golf Association? Me, right? So what I mean is, like, understanding how to navigate that space also requires you to know what is my cultural capital? How could I use that to leverage the space? And how do I make sure, like in an interview, I've shown up to interviews with my huaraches. And every time I show up with an interview with my huaraches, it sparks a conversation about my culture. It sparks a conversation about my grandpa and why he is the first entrepreneurship in my family who taught me entrepreneurship skills, right? So I bring my story to the space by being intentional about how I use my culture in that space, right? So it's the same way I would say advise you to too.
Awesome, thanks, Stephanie. So it looks like we may have time to answer this last question, and just kind of building off what Stephanie said, there's these barriers that are preventing people from accessing education or financial capital, all these different systems that are against people of color. And so what would you, for our panelists today, what would you say as far as last advice for these students that are coming for these underrepresented backgrounds on how to enter into that professional workspace?
I would say I did a keynote a couple months ago, and something I shared is that recognize that not everyone starts from the same starting line. We're all running a race. We all may even have different running shoes, different equipment, and different physical physique. But if we have the right mentality, then we can use whatever we have to get further than where we started. That's what it's all about, right? I'm the first person in my family to ever work in corporate America, right? So when I got here, I couldn't really have those conversations with my mom and my dad. They couldn't really tell me how to navigate in this space. But guess what? Every time I met someone who I felt like was slightly invested in my career or in my development, they became a mentor. And each and every time I kept getting another leg forward, and I used each and every opportunity that I could. Granted, I've been learning the game over the years because I didn't know how to play it at first. But I also recognize, and I'm glad Stephanie made that point about, like, yes, it is kind of required and until you get a certain level of privilege. Well, the truth of the matter is that some of you on this call right now have a level of privilege just because you went to college. You are in college where other people from where you're from didn't have that luxury. Guess what? You still go get to represent in your community and talk to little boys and little girls and inspire them and help them understand why doing something like you're doing is so impactful and so important. So I say that all to say, without going down a deep tangent, that we all start from different places. Just always remember that the windshield is a whole lot bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. Don't look out of your windows too much because you'll get distracted. because you always see somebody else that might be driving a fancier car or, you know, something that could be distracting. But if you focus on what's ahead, leverage what you've learned by looking in that rearview mirror, but stay focused on the road ahead, give it your all, and always be passionate about what you're doing and be true to who you are.
My advice would be similar in that I think first, and I typed this in here to share with you all, but I think part of my work is really to help and support other folks to uncover, to unlearn, to really tap into their true greatness. And in order for us to do that, we really have to be in a space, because I feel like I am so privileged to be able to live in my purpose. What that means is like, I am able to do what I love when I wake up for a living, right? That is a privilege. And I feel like the way that I got there was, I put the little math problem here, right? Is for you to really think about what is something that the world needs? What can financially sustain you, right? That is important, right? In this world, what can financially sustain you? And what are you good at? If you can marry all three of those, then you are going to be fully living in your authentic self and in your purpose. The problem is that a lot of folks don't understand. You know, I have people, especially who apply to Foster America. These are people who are CFOs. I've been working for 20 years and they are miserable. They don't love what they do. And when I talk to them, I realize that they would love to do they went and paid for this Harvard degree. They went to UCLA. They did all these things, but at the end of the day, they're not fulfilled, right? So what good is all this work if you are not fulfilled in your work? And so what I hope that you do is that you move with intention. And in order for you to move with intention, we're going to go back to the beginning. Who are you? What inspires you? What moves you? What fuels your purpose, right? Once you start to understand your gift to this world, what you are good at, and then you can start to really build the puzzle so that you can then find a career. My mom used to say this. My mom's a bus driver, didn't graduate from middle school. And she used to always say when I went to college, like in Spanish, I'll translate it, but she would say like, I want you to go to college because I want you to pick your career, not let it pick you like it picked me. Right? My mom doesn't have a choice but to be a bus driver at this point, right? She doesn't have all of these options. And so the privilege and the access that you get from going to an institution like UCLA is already one part of this equation, right? The other aspect is what are you going to do with that degree? Because a lot of people can do a lot of things with that degree, right? But it's really about, can you do something with that degree that brings you joy and that fulfills you? And if you can do that, that means that you are moving every decision on intention. The reason people have asked me like, oh, like, have you been able to do this work even before the age of 30? And it's really because I move with intention. Every decision that I've made has been centered around, what are my values? What do I believe in? And is this aligned with what I believe in? And so until you really tap into that question, like, what is it that brings you joy? What is it that really fuels you? And what brings you purpose? Then you can really start to build a life around you that is aligned with that.
I just got so excited, Stephanie, when I heard you talk about this, because I actually do workshops about it, and it's called Ikigai, and it's a Japanese concept called the purpose and the reason for being. And so please check it out, what Stephanie talked about, because it's really a good starting point to get to know you. And a little bit of advice for, for all of you that I practice myself. And, I really love school in the sense that schools of thought are included. How can I learn? What is this teaching me? What can this individual that's challenging me so much can teach me to better myself? And one of the things that helped me is know your story. What is your narrative? Like what has informed who you are first? What is your story? What has informed who you are? And then what have been the lessons you've learned from that story? How have they transformed into strengths? And how can you use those strengths to contribute to the higher self that you want to go to, right? And so when you think about it that way, how can you actually make this space? What you're doing is you're creating and building this space with these other spaces and these other energies. I'm a believer in energy as well from people. And how can you co-create something together? And so that's just one of the things that I always think about is know your story, your narrative, because you can constantly rewrite your narrative. What have been the lessons and what are the strengths that now can turn into contributions and move forward.
Man, Jay, that was spot on. I love it. I love it. I'm a firm believer in storytelling. One of the reasons why I wanted to work at this company was not so much about the products, but the story behind the products. Like, what was the inspiration behind everything? And I think for me, my advice for many of the students that are watching this is something that I've been learning what to do now. To Wayne's point, kind of like, how do you navigate in this corporate world if no one else around you has navigated in it? And I think for me, it's interesting because I remember growing up, and my father is he's a Black Puerto Rican, and I remember this story that was a very interesting prior to my father passing away a couple years ago. And my stepmom tells the story of this coworker saying, your dad one time, I'm not as tall as my dad. My dad's 6 feet. I'm nowhere near that. And my dad was 6 feet. I think he was 6'5" with the afro. And my dad, he never code switched. And we're talking about this back in the 80s. My dad was an engineer in the docks here in Pedro. And my dad, had his uniform on, had the biggest fro that you can imagine. He had the metal pick in his back pocket. And then he had his little Bacardi rum in his glove compartment. That's another story for another subject. But, that was who he was, right? It was his pick, his fro, and his Bacardi. And one of the things that I remember was an Australian Navy ship came on into the docks. My father had to go on board. As he's walking up, they said, "Sir, you need to turn around and go back." And my father said, "No, I'm here to inspect everything in the engine compartment." They're like, "No, you're not Jose Cruz," because they saw color. They didn't see Jose Cruz. And my dad didn't say nothing, turned around, walked back, and his boss was like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "They won't let me on the ship." Long story short, when my father eventually went on that ship, the Navy band was actually playing their song to welcome my father onto the ship. And I say that because my father, when he spoke to his boss was his mentor. Build a board of directors in your life. Build people that maybe have been underrepresented themselves, and now they're in a place of privilege, as Stephanie and Wayne, right, has spoken to. Like, find those people, right? And not just your family members, right? Like, find people that maybe are in the workplace or maybe outside of the workplace. Find that person that can give you financial advice. Find that person that can give you relationship. Like, find some key people and treat them to coffee. You know what I'm saying? Do like a 30-minute chat, but be very intentional on what you're going to do. But I believe that if you can build these board of directors in your life, it's going to help you navigate as an underrepresented employee or entrepreneur, whatever you guys go forward in doing, to allow yourself to be able to get these ideas. And back to Wayne's point, to be able to find and work together. And I think everyone here, Jay, Stephanie, and Wayne said it, like, you got to build a network. And I think what's beautiful about us being people of color and different backgrounds is that we believe in the power of familia and community. And I think that if we understand what hood we came from, el barrio, wherever that place is, right, we can come together. I think that it would allow you to be that much more successful in all your endeavors.
Awesome. So I just wanted to say thank you to Stephanie, Nohan, Wayne, and Jay. Truly remarkable people right here. You gave us some great feedback, some great insight. I really think that the students here are going to go back and feel fulfilled, as you would say, Stephanie, from all of the stuff that you've been able to give them. And so, like Nohan said, hey, embrace the hood you came from, embrace that struggle, embrace that grit, that hustle that we've been talking about, and use it to your advantage. And so I cannot thank the panelists enough today. Truly remarkable people. And so at this point, I will turn it back over to Kat, and maybe we'll see you again in the future.
Yes, thank you all so very much for joining us today. Jay, Wayne, Nohan, Colin, Stephanie, you've all provided such invaluable advice to our students, and particularly our students from underrepresented backgrounds, our students of color. And thank you for everybody who's watching for having joined us. for the Career Center's inaugural Doors series event. And for those of you who don't know, DOORS actually stands for Diversify, Optimize Opportunities, Relationships, and Success. This is a new initiative through the Career Center where we want to provide these types of opportunities to students. And so thank you for joining us today. I encourage you all to please connect with the panelists through LinkedIn, right? If you need some advice around how to use LinkedIn and figure out the hidden curriculum of that as well, we have a variety of programs, workshops that help address, questions around networking and connecting professionally. Please check out Handshake. It's like our one-stop shop where you can really access all of our resources and opportunities. We have over 130 events just in fall quarter. So please check them out and don't be shy. Come visit us virtually anytime, either by attending one of our events or coming to drop-ins, which are hosted Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. All right, thank you everybody so much for being here today, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.